All right, everybody, we are going to go ahead and get started here. I so appreciate you being here. I appreciate the flexibility with the room change. We should be back in our normal room next month, so apologize for any inconvenience, but thank you so much for being here. So I'm State Senator Ethan Corson. This is our 59th consecutive monthly town hall. So I'm excited to hit the big 6-0 next month. Our town halls are going to start collecting Social Security here pretty soon. So for those, I see some new faces, which is always awesome and always very much welcome and encouraged. I would love if everybody could bring a new person for our December one. But want to just give you our district boundaries. So we are on the Johnson side of the Johnson-Wyandotte line. And then we go out to about 95th Street. It's a little jagged, but pretty much 95th Street. And then we're state line to about 6 blocks west of Metcalf. So kind of that northeast Johnson County area here. So I'll start off with sort of the big thing, and I really want to leave it to my House colleagues to do more of kind of the analysis and kind of what's happened. But when we left, when the story ended last month, we were talking about whether we would have a special session. And that was, and so the big thing that has come since we last met is we are not having a special session, which I think is a good thing. All of my House colleagues talk a little bit about why that was, because it was really the House that principally failed to get enough signatures to call a special session. So let my colleagues talk about the dynamic over there. A big thing that I've done this past month is I'm a member of the Joint Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice Oversight. So we had a really good 2 days of hearings on that committee in Topeka. I would say that the main thing that we're wrestling with, just to put on your radar on that front, is we fairly acutely need to build a new prison in Hutchinson. There are some real issues just with how old that facility has become, and the need for just, at this point, I mean, it really, we do need to build a new one. So obviously that's an expensive proposition. It's nearly $500 million. And so the proposal is to look at a bonding of that would put the cost to the state at about $32 million a year over the period that it would take to pay off those bonds, that bond rather. So that's kind of the big thing that we're wrestling with on that front. They're just real concerns, both from number one, an employee retention piece. We've had real challenges in retaining our corrections employees. Obviously, I mean, those folks are folks I have just the highest level of respect for. That is an incredibly hard job to be involved in corrections, and it's something that you really have to have a real passion for to do that as a profession. So we have a lot of respect for those folks, and we have tried as a legislature to do a number of things over the past several years to try to retain as many of those workers as we can, because that's obviously an area where we really benefit from having skilled, well-trained, experienced folks. And the challenge with Hutchinson is that the air conditioning is pretty much non-existent, and it can get up in the summer when you're wearing the vest and the uniform. I mean, you can imagine how hot it can be for those folks. The Secretary of Corrections shared with us that there are some folks who will literally lose 10 pounds over a shift because they're just, it is that hot. And so we worry about it from an employee retention perspective. We also worry about that it does make the state vulnerable to a lawsuit from inmates related to their condition. So So we're sort of wrestling with that. We didn't really come to a conclusion as a committee of what we would recommend, but that's something that I would expect that the budget committees will be looking at this year, because it is something that does need to be addressed one way or the other here pretty soon. But I'm going to get really nerdy here for a minute, because I would ask you to bear with me, because I think this is so important. So I've mentioned this for the diehards. I've gone over this before, but Kansas does twice a year in April and then in November, we do what's called our consensus revenue estimates. And what that is where we get the division of the budget, the Department of the Administration, legislative administrative services, the Legislative Research Department, and then we have 3 consulting economists from state universities. They come together both in April and then in November, and they provide just a really nonpartisan sort of expert look at the fiscal situation of the state, and then make projections based off that going forward. And it really is sort of the anchor of what both the governor and the legislature look at when they're preparing that next year's budget. So that's what that is meant to be. So that's something that I think we all really need to keep a close eye on, because that affects so many things. So there is, I think, overall, a lot of very good news. So in fiscal year 2026, it is projected that we will increase. So fiscal year 2026 will end in June of 2026. It's projected that we will take in $169.9 million more than was projected in April. So that's a sign that job growth has been good. We have folks who are paying taxes because of that employment. Businesses are paying taxes because they're doing well. So we are above 1.6% above what we projected in April. So that is always good news. And they're projecting, and that would be, if we met that would be a 2% increase from 2025 fiscal year. So from 2025 fiscal year to 2026, the state would collect 2% more in revenues. Fiscal year 2027 was revised to be about less than a percentage point, 0.9% below 2026. But I mean, generally, we're kind of right in that same range. So that is overall very good news. The thing that I do want to always note for caution is we are still spending more than we are taking in. So the state budget every year is still spending more than we're taking in. So you can imagine, you just think of your household and your checking account, that is not a good trend long term, right? So we're spending about $347 million a year more than we're taking in, to give you a sense of what that looks like. So we had a $3.2 billion surplus at the end of fiscal year 2024. That's what ended in June of 2024. Because we continue to spend more than we're taking in, our surplus is now at $2.9 billion at the end of 2025, in June of 2025. It is projected to be down to $1.2 billion in fiscal year 2030. So still a surplus, but you can see just the trend is that we are spending that down over time. But again, this is an improved situation because in April, we were looking at a $731 million hole in fiscal year 2029. That was sort of the big hole we were looking at. And that is gone away according to the projections. So I think that is really overall a good sign now. So why are these projections different than we thought? Some of it is what I mentioned earlier, attributed to good job growth, businesses paying taxes, employers paying taxes, really healthy signs in the economy. But the two big reasons that we are in a little bit better fiscal situation than we anticipated is number one, we are spending less on K-12 education. And the reason for that, though, is not because we're not funding it according to the formula. It is because we have 10,000 fewer students enrolled than we thought that we would have when we did those projections. And a big part of the funding formula is based off the number of students. So just fewer students are bringing that down. So we have fewer students in the K-12 system. So that's about $158 million a year that we had thought that we would be spending on K-12 that we're not. And then there has been a slight increase in the federal share of Medicaid. And even that slight increase makes a big difference in the budget because the state Medicaid program is a $4 billion program. So if you get just a slight increase in the federal payment for that, that ends up actually being quite a lot of difference in terms of the budget. So those are the two main drivers. So again, I think overall good, always something to keep an eye on. And I will sort of caveat everything with these are projections. And so they are the best that I think these really expert nonpartisan folks can do. But again, a projection is always going to be a projection. So let me stop there. I want to turn it over to State Board of Education member Melanie Haas. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Senator. Good morning, everyone. As he said, I'm Melanie Haas. I represent Districts 2 on the State Board of Education. I have a map today. It's that one all the way over there on the right, and my district is that green one up in the corner. What it doesn't show you is the southern half of Wyandotte County, which I also represent. I want to say good morning to my +1. Can I call you my +1? Because I encouraged her to come, but Josepha Hayden Champfossy serves on the City Council in Mission and was just reelected. So congratulations. Are there any other municipal electeds here? Would you like to give us a wave if you're in the room? There's one in the back corner from Miriam, right, sir? Tell me your name again. Good morning. Anyone else? Okay, thank you both for your service. My colleagues in the back are going, why is she going first? But I've got to step out and head to Wichita, where the Kansas Association of School Boards is having their conference this weekend. And so the state board members go and speak with them. Yes, exactly. Answer questions, just kind of fill them in on what we're doing in Topeka, but you guys get filled in first. So you've probably heard me talk a little bit about how we're sort of in a rebuilding year as a state board. Remember, we had elections last November, and so we seat new people in January. And then I've kind of learned in my time on the board that really it takes 2 years to kind of get them fully up to speed. So we're about halfway there. So some months we have really challenging meetings where there are lots of questions, and November was a month where we had kind of a lighter meeting. I feel like I have a lot of good news to share with you. So I'm going to start with our graduation rates are up in Kansas. That is really something to celebrate, and they're not just up a little bit. Across the board, they're up by 4.4%, and those numbers are even higher for special populations, like special education is up, I think, 7.7%. And so that brings us to a statewide total where we're sitting at 90.5%. The state board's goal for graduation rate is 95%. So we're not there yet, but I feel like we've made some significant progress. So I'm really proud of that. It was great to hear that from our schools. The reason we just got this report in November is because apparently those kids that should have graduated in May actually have until October to graduate. I don't fully understand the nuts and bolts of how you might graduate in August, but they do have a little bit of extra time. So if they're missing a class, if there's an issue with their transcript, those numbers don't get reported until October. So we were excited to celebrate that. Something else that we got to hear about, more good news, is that career and technical education enrollment is also up. And so you've heard me talk a lot about how not every kid has to go to college. They don't have to be pursuing that 4-year price tag education after high school, that there are lots of other career opportunities that sometimes are free. I've gone and toured some of our union facilities where they will train anyone who is interested in learning to be a sheet metal worker, for instance. So it's great to see that CTE enrollment is also up. And then we also got to hear from a group of kids from JAG-K, which is Jobs for America's Graduates. And JAG-K has programs in a lot of high schools across the state. Not every high school has one. My kids go to school in Shawnee Mission. And so in Shawnee Mission, there are 2 JAG-K programs. There's one at West and there's one at North. And those programs are really focused on just helping kids get the opportunity to see what jobs might be available to them. And so they have a lot of hands-on opportunities to look at different workforce areas that they might be interested in and kind of figure out what that looks like. They also, the kids that came in front of us this month are all elected state officers of JAG-K. And to hear their public speaking skills, I'll tell you what, they would put all of us here to shame. They were absolutely phenomenal. The way that they memorized their speeches, they are poised, they are dressed, and they hit every word. It was just so impressive to see this from high school kids. So a really excellent kickoff to the meeting. We also, you've heard me talk a lot about literacy, and I've been fortunate to join a new group here in the Kansas City area of folks who are focused on what's coming next. So yes, there's literacy in the science of reading, so you probably won't be surprised, you're saying it, to hear about math, the science of math. And so, but on the reading front, I'll start there. Dr. Lori Curtis is someone at KSDE who we really look to. She's leading the charge on that literacy front. And so every month we get to hear from her, and she brings teachers from around the state. So Jerry, where are you? Jerry Stogsdill's back there. We heard from a kindergarten class who has gotten rid of one-to-one devices. They took those tablets and computers, they put them all away. They're on a cart, they have access to them, and we heard that they just pull them out for maybe testing, maybe if they need to. But I was so excited. You've heard me say so many times, kids need to be reading books, they need to be touching paper, they need to have that tactile opportunity, and they're getting that. So I'm really excited for that. The state board applauded when they said that they got rid of one-to-one in that classroom and that school is focused on that. So that was really exciting for me. I've just wrapped up in July. I started serving along with 2 other board members on a task force at the Kansas State School for the Deaf. And so we've been meeting with them every couple of months. We had a couple of parents on that task force. We called it a school improvement task force. There's not a report out yet, and so that's something that we're going to be compiling. But it's been a really interesting opportunity. I previously served as the board liaison for the School for the Blind, which is in KCK. The School for the Deaf is in Olathe. And so it was yet another opportunity to just get really much closer to what that school looks like, what education looks like in that environment, and what the board can be doing to make sure that we're creating not just opportunities, but that the school is getting everything that they need from the board. Both of those schools go to the legislature every year and ask separately for their own budgets. The budgeting for those 2 schools is a little bit different. It's not necessarily a per kid count, as the senator was just referencing with some of those enrollment numbers being down. They have to literally go and say, hey, we also have state buildings. And so the School for the Deaf needed a new roof last year, and they had to go and make sure that they got that. A couple of years ago, the School for the Blind needed an elevator for kids in wheelchairs. So it's always good to spend time with those folks. And I think that's really all I've got for you. I'm going to head to Wichita and hang out with my local board folks, but I'll stick around for a little bit. I just won't be here for questions. So if you need to reach me, I'm happy to give you my cell phone number. And of course, you can reach me through Senator Corson. So thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Tell Heather hello for me when you get there. Good morning. My name is Jarrod Ousley. I represent House District 24. I didn't come with anything prepared, but I'm certainly glad the senator went over the CREs. You know, that was just updated recently, and those numbers are fresh and hot off the press. And the interesting part about that is that the legislative Special Committee on Budget, I think is the name of the committee. Senator Pat Petty, that joins us once and again, is on that committee as well as I am. And we've already met once, and we've already gone over some agency budgets. Now they're little agencies, but we've heard their budgets. We're ready to dive into next session with those as pretty firm numbers. And the senator asked a question in the beginning of our 8-hour meeting 2 weeks ago. None of these are based off of the CRE. None of these are based off of last year's fiscal, data, right? These are all speculations at this point, and they're not even up-to-date speculations. We don't have our caseloads. We talk about the per pupil based state aid. Well, that's per caseload. We don't know if we're 10,000 students down, and we don't get that information until well after the enrollment process. But I just thought it was interesting that in an effort to be efficient, we are jumping into a process that we have a division of budget underneath the executive branch that would typically take on this responsibility. And for the last 2 years, the legislature has taken it upon themselves in order to get a 2-week jump on our budgeting process, to rush a process, not get the proper input, not have the fiscal analysis in place, not wait for the CREs to be updated. And we made that very clear at the very beginning of that committee hearing. Now we're scheduled to meet 2 more days here at the end of November, and then we are suspected to meet 2 more days in December. So that's going to be a total of 5 days. And they're going to be long days, but that's going to be a total of 5 days that then we will put together a budget, give that to the legislature on the first or second day of session. And that's what our session will be based off of. So I'm glad the senator went over the numbers. I am not the best with that. I would have had to read from a script, and I'm never any good at that neither. But then Senator Corson also touched on the Hutch prison. And on the building construction committee, I've had the opportunity to tour that prison. And the living conditions are poor. They're not up to federal standards. And so I'm glad the lawsuit was also raised, because if we don't do something, we are going to end up getting sued for not providing, quality housing for residents there. I think the cells currently are 40 square feet, and federal minimums are 48 square feet. So that is a problem that the legislature is going to have to address sooner or later. And you guys have to understand, these cells and these cell blocks are stone and iron that are from, 2 centuries ago. So these living conditions are poor, to say the least. On the juvenile justice and corrections front, we had a roundtable the other day. You guys know I serve on child welfare and foster care in the House, and the Senate doesn't have that correlating committee. Well, last year we passed, I hesitate to call it juvenile justice reform, but we passed a bill because we are hearing repeatedly, stories after story, that kids that once upon a time, before Kansas's juvenile justice reform that took place in 2016, these kids would have gone into our justice correction, our justice system, juvenile offenders. And instead they're coming into child in need of care cases. So instead of dealing with corrections officers, they're dealing with social workers. And we struggle as a state to retain people in a lot of spectrums, and social workers, corrections officers, hospital workers. You give it a name, and we probably struggle there. So social workers are no different. And we're hearing more and more of assaults on social workers from kids that have violent or criminogenic behavior. Last year, in an effort to reduce those incidences, the House passed a bill to allow judges to put these children in a secure facility. I'm going to stop short of calling it detention, but it's involuntary and it's secure. And it's sitting in the Senate committee. It's sitting in Judiciary in the Senate. And we had a roundtable the other day with quite a few senators and representatives, and I had the opportunity to sit in. We had the Department of Corrections, we had KDADS, we had DCF, we had some of our child welfare providers, we had attorneys, and it was a good discussion. And I walked away from that really thinking that we're going to get a better product next year out of the Senate, having had these discussions during the interim. So in a crazy world that we're living in, I just wanted to shed a little bit of light that I felt like for that 8 hours that I was sitting in a meeting in Topeka, that it was actually productive. And actually one of the major components of the lawsuit against our state for children and child welfare in the system, they were there as well. And when their comment at the end of the day, reflections at the end of the day, what are you walking away from this with? Somewhere along the lines was made that it's nice to see people actually working on this, and that you all are dedicated enough to spend 8 hours in a room together. And we had national folks that, were like, well, Kansas can do this, and the dedication that was just demonstrated in this room is more so than you'll see in a lot of states. So I'll leave you on that positive note, and I will hand it over to my colleague, Jerry Stogsdill. Good to see you all this morning. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Representative Stogsdill. I represent the 21st District, which is mostly Prairie Village and a little slice of Overland Park. And we've had some really good news, I think, over this last month since we last met. And some of it came right out of Prairie Village, out of my district. We did pretty well. Yes. And there was a lot of money spent, dark money spent on that election for the other side, and it did not work for them. So way to go, Prairie Village. But anyway, couple of things. I think we owe a big round of applause and thanks to Republican Senator and Speaker of the House, Dan Hawkins, because what he did shortly after the election, I think, couldn't have been more of a gift to Democrats in the House. He stripped the 10 people who did not sign on for the special session petition. They needed 88, apparently 10 representatives on the other side of the aisle refused to sign that petition. And 2 days later, he stripped them of their chair positions, their vice chair positions, all of that sort of thing. Now, I think it was just pure vindictive retribution. And I think if I would have been one of those 10, I would have been slightly peeved that happened. And I can't imagine when they go back in January, they're going to be too thrilled about voting the way Dan tells them to this next session. And that's always one thing that's made me very proud as a Democrat. I run our morning meetings, and whenever we have a meeting about legislation, as agenda chair, I run that meeting. And we have good discussions on bills that are coming up that day and all that sort of thing. And we have a good, robust discussion on that. And then the message to our people is, we've had this discussion, how people feel, now go vote your district. And on the other side, and Dan just proved it for us, you do as you're told. And if it's against your district, I don't care. You do what Republican leadership tells you to do, or you get your chair moved away, you get your chair ripped away, you get primaried, all of that sort of thing. So personally, I think there would probably be a lot of people out there who are constituents of these folks that signed that petition that are going, well, why did you do that? Especially in southern Johnson County here. That's going to be very interesting. I haven't seen the petition yet to see exactly who signed it, but we'll make that very public, I'm sure. So anyway, I've attended a couple of things that I thought were very interesting. The governor's budget hearing that she held here in Leawood. I thought she did a great job. She had Adam Prophet, who's the budget director. They both made a great presentation on where we're looking at as far as the budget goes next year. And I think that one of the things that came out of that, if the present administration in DC actually does away with SNAP benefits, it's going to be devastating for a lot of people in Kansas who depend on those things. And what are we going to do? Are we going to let those people starve? And the governor made it clear. She said, we don't have it in the budget to come up and replace those funds that we would lose if those SNAP benefits are taken away. So that's going to be a problem. And the other thing, of course, we've been fighting for Medicaid expansion for the 9 years that I've been up there so far. And I think we were all hoping that, well, maybe, this will be the year. Well, Washington now is saying we may not have Medicaid at all And that kind of flows into a meeting I went to a couple nights ago with the Kansas Hospital Association. And I was talking to several of the CEOs from the hospitals here in Kansas City and so on. And they were saying, man, we are operating on a razor's edge as it is with Medicaid funding coming in. And we've heard that there's 30 to 40 hospitals that are right on the edge of possibly closing in Kansas. And they're living with that Medicaid money that they're getting. And they put out a paper to us to show what their projections were, and they're projecting there are 60 hospitals in Kansas that could be on the up for closure if they do away with the Medicaid money that is coming in to help support those hospitals now. Well, I can tell you, out in Western Kansas, you lose your hospital, your town's done. And who wants to move out to a town where if you have a heart attack, it's only an hour and a half away to get to a hospital? So that is a critical issue for Kansas. And I think it's something that we're really going to have to take a look at. And again, people said, you know, what are you projecting for January? I think all we can do for January right now is just guess. Because what's going on right now, today, could be changed coming in from Washington next week and could change again the following week. And goodness knows what we're going to be looking at in January, 60 days from now. So to be determined. The follow-up on education a little bit. I was really glad to hear Melanie talk about that they're looking askance at tablets in our schools, especially for primary kids. I think that's just outrageous. I wouldn't have a tablet in the school until at least 4th or 5th grade. And those kids need books. They need I've been reading a lot from a professor at UCLA that she's done a lot of study on this issue, and she said your brain development for kids at that age, they need to have the brain go to the arm, go to the hand, go to the pencil, go to the paper. That's how you learn. You don't do it by going on a tablet and trying to look at 10-point pica type to learn at that age. You need big letters, all of that sort of thing. So I'm hoping that maybe we can take another look at that. I certainly want to bring that up in the Education Committee this coming year as to what we can do possibly about getting rid of tablets at that age level and going back to the way we used to teach reading and so on. But this was concerning for me is that this is the first time in 9 years we have not had an interim committee on education. So that concerns me because we have had good discussions and so on in the interim committees that I've sat in on over these last several years. And I don't know whether it's because the chair is gone a lot. Her husband is, of course, Congressman Estes. So I think they've probably been traveling quite a bit. But I think that education, since it's the biggest part of our budget and so on like that, we might have had an interim committee to talk about things before we go back in January. The other committee that I serve on, of course, is Water Committee. And we have done a great job over the last 6 years on the Water Committee, coming up with programs that will address our water needs in the state of Kansas and so on. It's been a great committee. It's been very nonpartisan. Everybody agrees that's a super problem in Kansas and we have to address it. And it doesn't matter which political party you're in. So, but now people I've talked to are going, look at what they're doing to the EPA regulations and everything else along that line. That's going to have an impact on our water. I don't think they give a hoot about water in Kansas. So, and especially when we talk about things like drinking water, I kind of want that to be, nice and clear instead of some shade of color in there. So I think that's going to be a big discussion the minute we get back to Water Committee in January. And we're going to have to figure out what we can do locally maybe to offset some of these changes in EPA regulations and so on. So anyway, I think we've had some good news. We've had some crazy news, again, coming from the federal government that I think, we want to talk about Kansas issues, but what's happening in Washington is going to have a big impact on what goes on here in Kansas. So anyway, I will look forward to hoping to answer your questions when we have time for that. And I'll turn this over to Representative Sawyer Clayton.
Thank you, Representative. And good morning, everyone. I'm Representative Stephanie Sawyer Clayton. I represent, it's the map in the center, the one that says 19, that's kind of chartreuse, basically Metcalf to state line, 83rd to 103rd, unless you are east of 95th, and then the northern boundary is Somerset, and the southern boundary is 95th. So, serve on a number of committees. I have had the good fortune of being on a number of interim committees this fall. And so, one of them that I've been serving on is tax. We will be meeting again on Tuesday. And one of the problems with these interim or study committees is that the way that they used to be is that you would just drill down into issues because a lot of legislators, come and go. That's kind of the nature of democracy. They die, they retire, they lose their elections. And then there's me. Which is so funny because I still feel like I'm brand new. But in any case, as you get a lot of that turnover, there, especially in tax, there is a great deal of information to drill down to and to understand. But now the way it kind of goes, and Senator Corson serves on this committee with me, so I can see him trying not to smile because he totally knows what I'm going to say, is that it usually ends up being a platform for whoever is chairing the committee to prove their points about what they may or may not support. Now, that being said, I think it is useful because it's sort of a harbinger for what is going to be coming out of the Senate Tax Committee, some of which is, honestly, it's good. We are going to be looking at more advocates, especially when it comes to property taxes, which I know I've heard from a fair amount of you from. And so I think that will be good. Taxpayer advocacy and sort of an ombudsman position, that is the kind of transparency that we need about money that we have no choice but to pay, right? So I love seeing things like that. I think that we will probably see some sort of massive property tax related bill. We'll see one from the House and one from the Senate. No offense, Senator. I think ours is going to be better. But, but the House, we just tended, our tax chair is a little bit more chill. We are a larger legislative body and we run for office all the time. I had friends that were worried about me because they were like, why isn't your yard sign out? And I'm like, I'm actually not running this election. They said, well, you said you're always running. Yeah. Okay. So sorry. Yeah. Close enough though. Right. But in any case, so we're doing that. We have finished up our work in the Commerce Interim Committee. And so Representative Hsu and I kind of covered that in our last meeting. I wanted to talk to you about a couple of bills that are just sort of my projects. I always like to do some research, get some constituent input, and then introduce a couple of bills, which sometimes they get hearings and sometimes they don't. So one of them, this kind of harkens back a little bit to what Representative Stogsdill was speaking about, there are two ways, again, as we've mentioned before, for the legislature or for special sessions to be called. Almost always the governor calls the special session, tells us we need to come in there and do whatever it is that we do during those special sessions. And every once in a while, the legislature will sign petitions where you have to get notarized 2/3 majority from both chambers, right? As we know, did not fail to get the majority in the House. By the way, I don't get to say this very often. I was right. I told you they weren't going to do it, and they didn't do it. So, and again, one way to tell is that if I'm losing my mind and, going off at the mouth, that means that I've lost and all I have left is invective. If I'm quiet and calm, we're all good. So that's how you want me. But in any case, one of the things is that these petitions, we don't really know who signed them and who didn't. And you want to know why? Is that there is no provision that says that those are open record. Now, if a legislator who has or has not signed, especially one that has signed, they could take a picture and say, look, I signed, it's notarized, but I didn't sign it. I know I didn't sign it. You guys know I didn't sign it, but there's no way I have of proving that. Okay, I really would not have signed it. I just really want to make that clear. But there is no way of proving that. I prefer transparency in all things. This is something that I have been working on regardless of what side of the aisle that I served on. So I am working with our revisers to make a bill so that when a special session is called by petition,
Who signed the petition and who did not sign the petition will be part of public record the same as any other vote, because it is a vote. And you need to know what your legislators are doing because, for crying out loud, you're paying good money for us to go there and do our work. You should know how we're conducting ourselves. You should know if someone is saying, hey, let's spend some more money while people are trying to, why SNAP benefits are getting suspended, at least temporarily. And while all of that is going on, you all should know what the conduct is. So we'll see if that bill gets any traction. Survey says I highly doubt it, but efforts should be made. Another bill that I have been working on for a number of years, and this has really been on my mind lately for a couple of reasons. So what this bill does is that it makes marriage illegal unless you are 18 and over. Because right now, if you are under 18, you can't sign any contracts. You are not an adult unless it comes to marriage. Now, how many of you, I think a lot of times when it comes to marriage, I'll bring that up and people will say, well, gosh, what about, kids that, they're fooling around in high school, they get pregnant, like things happen, they get married. Well, I went and I looked in and I did some research in the Office of Vital Statistics in Kansas, and most child marriages are not, the captain of the football team marrying his cheerleader girlfriend. Guys, this is almost always human trafficking. And it's not human trafficking in the sense of the word, someone marries someone and then, sends them to Nepal or Thailand. It is they marry a vulnerable child because 15-year-olds are children. So are 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds. And despite what Megyn Kelly says, 14-year-olds are definitely children. And children should not be getting married. When you have someone who is under the age of 18 that gets married, it is almost always an adult male and a teenage girl. And so we don't do that, especially because Missouri outlawed child marriage. So now, I'm sorry, I cannot be having that. If for nothing else, Kansas cannot be like the weird hick backwoods, marrying off children state. I will not have that. We are pushing further to get a hearing for this. I have been hearing I've heard from people who have found out more about this bill, and I have strong conservative Republican allies on this, because a lot of them believe in the sanctity of marriage and think it's a very solemn thing that should only be taken on by adults. And I don't care why they want it. The matter of fact is that they want it. And so I will say just about anything and agree with just about anyone to get bills passed that protect the innocent and vulnerable in Kansas. So I'm really looking forward to pursuing that project. Let's see, I will be doing a couple of things in December. I don't know if I have any, sometimes I substitute on interim committees. I'll be substituting on that budget committee with Representative Ousley next week or a couple of weeks from now. But in December, I will be traveling to 2 conferences. One of them is regarding gambling policy. So I'd like to take a little bit of a deep dive into sports wagering. Did that this summer just to sort of see what some of the effects are. And the other one is one that, tracks a little bit more conservative. It's in Dallas. It's the American Legislative Exchange Council, otherwise known as ALEC. And it is always good to get a preview for some of the bills that will be introduced next session. So it is a good use of my time, but just in case you guys see, hey, why is she going these places? That's why I'm going those places. It's definitely hard work, especially ALEC. I am usually one of 2 Democrats out of over 400, 500 legislators who attend. So it's like, hey guys, how's it going? But I also used to, serve on the other side, so I'm very comfortable. And every once in a while, they have ideas that are not terrible, but most of them, I tend to fundamentally disagree. But you can always find something. It's a good opportunity to build relationships with colleagues because you know what? Like it or not, I am in the party that is in the super minority. I have a district that I need to serve, and the way that you get it done is you get along with people while you're up there, regardless of how you disagree. Also, my colleague Melissa Orpez is here, and she's awesome. Sorry, she hates it when I do that, but I'm not going to never do that. Sorry. All right, that is all I have to say. Thank you all for having me, and Senator.
All right, we got a mic going around. We'll do some Q&A. I think we need to. All right, so let's wait for the mic, and then we will do some Q&A.
I had a question. I just did some quick research on the internet. I don't know how valid this info is. It's about capers and the cost of living increase. I understand. Apparently, there's a bill, a Senate bill maybe related to the cost of living increase for capers, and the internet told me the last increase was 1998. That sounds kind of almost too far back to be possible, but maybe it is. So, what are the chances of a capers cost of living adjustment of some sort to make up for the increases, especially more recent increases in cost of living?
So we had to give it a little background. We have I think that 1998 number is probably right on when we've done a CAPERS cost of living. I voted for doing a cost of living increase every time we've had the opportunity in the Senate. My colleague, Senator Pat Petty, has really been the leader in pushing for that. We've had it brought up as an amendment multiple times. It has always failed pretty substantially. So it is something that I support. I'll continue to advocate for. I will continue to vote for. I don't think it will pass, at least with the current makeup of the Senate, just to give you my honest answer. And I don't know if House colleagues have a different view.
Legislators are part of the retirement plan now, and so you would think there would be some self-interest there.
Yeah, this question was brought up at the governor's budget meeting that we had in Leawood a couple of weeks ago. And apparently the way the bill was written back in that day, it did not allow for a COLA. And the person who brought the question up was pointing out that we have teachers that retired in 1999, that sort of thing. Their CAPERS contribution every month is $200. That's just outrageous. And so I think that is something that we need to address in the legislature. We've tried to bring it up on numerous occasions and with no luck whatsoever from the other side of the aisle. But it is disgraceful that we have teachers that taught 30, 35 years and they can't make it on Social Security and their CAPERS retirement. So it's something that I think we certainly ought to be looking at. But the governor also said to do the kind of COLA increase that really needs to be done, we don't have the money for it in Kansas. And that is outrageous of what some of the stuff that we've had to spend money on and not allow for our public employees and our teachers to get adequately compensated for the work that they put in for a career.
I want to go back to something Ethan said way in the beginning about the funding for schools. You said there were 10,000 less children than we thought. And I know it's a rough number, but are we seeing an upsurge in homeschooling and private school?
So I think it's a couple different things. I wish Board Member Haas was still here, but I think that there are some folks who during COVID left public school and just did not return to public school, just decided to stay in either private or homeschool for the remainder of that. And also, like many states, but Kansas has also had this challenge. We just have a declining birth rate in that folks are having fewer children. And so ultimately we're kind of at a point where we're starting to see the effects of that in public school enrollment. So just overall, as you know, our state population is growing. So the census from 2010 to 2020, which was the most recent census, that was our state's slowest population growth in 100 years. And so I think you're now, as that population is getting to be, more school aged, you're just seeing a decline of enrollment.
Yeah, I think this also has to do with the fact, look what's coming out of Washington. They want to do away with the Department of Education. They're vilifying public education. And I think that gives a lot of parents pause to think, well, gee, is there a real problem in our public schools and so on? No, there isn't. It's the perception that these people are perpetrating on the American public. So I think that could be part of the problem, is that they're just spreading the idea that public schools are not doing their jobs. And I guarantee you, teachers are doing their jobs. But we've talked about this in Education Committee, and because we've had a couple of lobbyists, one of them from out of state, who's constantly in Topeka talking about how bad our public schools are and all of that sort of thing. And I asked him one time, I said, well, if it's all our teachers' faults, of course. And I said, well, how do you, do teachers determine what kind of house that kid goes to home to at night? Do they have a computer? Do they have adequate food? Do they have a parent at home? There's a whole lot of things that teachers have absolutely no control over. And that impacts those kids in the public schools and how they achieve or don't achieve in our public schools. So I think we need an administration, and we need people here in Kansas that will celebrate how great a job our teachers are doing. And I've talked to several teachers that have come in and testified in the Education Committee, and they said, I'm getting out of education because I'm tired of being vilified. And, when we start losing teachers over that false perception, that's outrageous. So I think we need to really figure out a way to make it more aware, make Kansas more aware of the great job that our teachers are doing, the great job that our public schools are doing. Schools built Johnson County, the economic engine of Kansas. I've always said, people didn't move to Johnson County because we had fewer trees than Jackson County. It was our schools, and it remains our schools, and I can guarantee if even the perception of our schools starts to go down in Johnson County, watch our property values go down, watch our economic development go down, watch the number of companies that want to move to Johnson County, the number of people that want to move to Johnson County, going to go right down with it. So this is an extremely important issue, if you ask me.
And I've got just 2 cents to add to that. On the budget committees, you've all heard the Speaker of the House say he was going to slash, 250 million more from the budget. Well, the beginning of that process is to deny every enhancement request from every agency, and then have them come to the legislative committee and prove why they need this enhancement, whether it's to fill an FTE or in the Department of Education's situation. One of their enhancements was to request additional funding to meet statutory mandates. So they had, X amount of dollars for House Bill this. You mandated us to do it, but it was an unfunded mandate. We're just asking you to simply pay for what you are now demanding from us. So while the Department of Education receives unfair, unjust scrutiny, they're also doing more with less on a day-to-day basis.
I think I was paying attention, but I didn't hear the word vouchers mentioned.
I mean, this last session was my 11th session. Next year will be 12. Vouchers have been there in one shape or another since I got there. They are currently in the form of a tax credit scholarship. And that tax credit scholarship arguably is the reason I'm in the legislature. It was originally for low students in a failing school. And every year that I've been there, we have managed to fight off the funds being expanded, but the eligibility has been chipped away at every year to where it's currently, for any student in any school. It still has a $10 million SGF cap, and they've never been able to fully utilize that. So they've had to expand eligibility every year so that they can expand our voucher program every year. We've heard the schemes of the educational savings accounts And we have states that have come in front of us that have shown why those are a tremendous improper use of taxpayer dollars. It's a fraudulent system. It's been proved over and over, and it's a failing system. It doesn't provide better education for the children. And so we've managed to, on one hand, fight back voucher expansion, while on the other hand, they do chip away. So I've not heard anything coming up in this session. I do believe there's an understanding. It's not a popular opinion in the state of Kansas. Kansas has strong schools. We always have. Johnson County without exception. So if you have a more specific question, I'm happy to get further into it.
I would just add, and this is not a self-interested or partisan comment. I think it's just a fact that as folks look at this, the reality is if we have a Republican governor in 2027, we will have full-blown vouchers in the state of Kansas, just like they do in Iowa, Arizona, other things like that. So, I mean, I think that is the stakes of the governor's election. And I think everybody should just have that, whatever their position is for or against, that is the stakes of the election.
So while I'm not going to disagree with the senator, in the House, we did have a vote come up for the expansion of a program. And I had KLRD legislative research put together a map of where a voucher could be utilized, right? Because while in Johnson County we have plenty of private school options or non-public school options, you get outside of larger areas and those options don't exist. And often when they do have an option for a non-public school, it's only K through 8. You know, you can't get a diploma through it. And I had that map printed and I had it on 125 members' desks. And that vote was skipped over that day. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And when these members saw that this is voting against your district, how are you going to go home and say that your tax dollars are now going to Johnson County for residents that could afford the private option when it's not even eligible for your constituency? So it's stay tuned, I guess. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I told him, I was like, cool, we'll just use all of your money to send our kids to Pembroke. It's like, come on. You know, it's a good way to stop them from voting for it, though.
Ethan, did you say full-blown vouchers? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
I didn't hear what you said. Okay. I guess we're teaching for 50 years and being in the Shawnee Mission School District and the Blue Valley School District. If everybody in this room could go by and just observe a classroom in a Shawnee Mission School District or Blue Valley West, you'd be stunned at what is being taught in those schools, in those classrooms. It is just, it's staggering. It's so good. In my walks each day, I'm hearing advertisement, and I don't know where this is coming from. And I heard this last advertisement that 32,000 kids in the state of Kansas are not reading to grade level. And I think the gentleman's name is Tolbert. What is the purpose for vouchers? Is that the purpose for what he's doing?
Yeah, I'll answer that in part, and then I'm sure other colleagues want to chime in. Coach McDonald's also my high school baseball coach, by the way. One of the winningest high school baseball coaches in the history of Kansas. Is in the 38 consecutive winning seasons. Anyway, and I'm afraid if he doesn't like the answer, I'm gonna have to run laps. But yes, I mean, so there is, and I wish that Board Member Haas, we should bring this up next month, but there is some folks out there who I think looking at some of these test scores and they are using them in a misleading way to paint a picture that nobody in Kansas can read and nobody in Kansas can do math, right? I mean, if you listen to Senate President Masterson talk about public schools in Kansas, that is his narrative is kids can't read anymore, kids can't do math. That is sort of a misuse of what those numbers are. Melanie can explain that more. But it deals with what is considered proficient, what's considered grade level. And so they are twisting those in a way to try to use that to paint the picture. I would say, in my opinion, to try to set the stage for trying to gain support for vouchers by being able to say, look, these public schools are failing Kansans. They can't read, they can't do math. We need to have vouchers. When again, I think that's just not really borne out by a fair and correct reading of what the numbers show.
You know, I've always thought that the legislators should take the MAP test, the same one that, that our kids take. And, we can have it anonymized so no one knows. I mean, my math score is going to be awful. I will say that. But I think that honestly, we have a lot of adults who are putting down these unfair standards when it comes to schools and measuring all of that out, saying, oh, we shouldn't give these kids participation trophies. We should have incredibly high standards for them. And yet here we are in our adulthood, removing all standards for licensure, which puts a great deal of people in danger, and then handing out participation trophies to each other at our softball games when we're too old to be playing. I mean, it's one of those things where I do see that really unfair double standard. And usually if someone says that our schools are failing, it's because they're cooking the numbers. I believe it's the NAEP score that they're citing. Am I right, Jarrod?
So, and just to the privatization of a public school system, 52% of Kansas's budget goes into education. You got to think that's an awful lot of money. We got a $6 billion SGF fund, $10 billion overall, and nobody's profiting from it. And if we go full-blown voucher, the thing that, what did you call him, Talbert? We'll stick with that. We'll say is, well, if you fund it, they'll build the buildings. And the last time I had the opportunity to be in Florida, I saw what they call micro schools. And you think of a vacant slip in a strip mall, and you can cram a micro school in there. And there's no teaching requirement. There's no credentials whatsoever. But they get the dollar, and I have my opinion. Education's not the intent. I think it's for profit. But that's the type of system that we've seen when full-blown vouchers come. It's not based on quality education.
Yeah, I just wanted to also point out, these people have been so effective at vilifying our teachers and so on. We had 1,800 teaching vacancies in the state of Kansas last year. 1,800. Yeah. Pardon?
How many supers?
There were, I'm not sure what the exact number of that was, but they were, I think, before the before the school year started last year, there were at least 40 superintendent positions that were open in the state of Kansas. That's what you get when you tell lies about our school systems, about our teachers, about the value that they bring to all of our communities. We still have guys across the aisle that are voting against public education, voting for vouchers, and 61 counties in the state do not have a single private school. And I've always said, well, I guess if you want to take away money from your constituents and maybe your one school in your little county and send it to Johnson County, well, I guess I'm okay with that. But I don't think your constituents would see it the same way. But they continue to do that. It's just unbelievable to me. But that's it's a super important issue, and it's like Senator Corson said: if we get a Republican governor in 2028, man, we are in big trouble with our public schools. So keep that date in mind.
And then to kind of follow on Representative Stogsdill, one statistic I read this past week that is really jarring is that Kansas has the second highest percentage of teachers leaving the profession of any state in the entire country. And so think about this, 12.2% of Kansas teachers are leaving the profession every year. And so I did not fully realize the gravity of it until I saw that. So I just wanted share that with you. And also, I just want to close by saying I never want to feel defensive about this discussion because I'm not perfect. I'm always trying to get better. Our schools are great. They're not perfect. So I am all for people coming to the table with ideas for how we can improve schools. Whatever the reading scores are, I want them to be better. Whatever the math scores are, I want them to be better. Whatever the graduation rate, like Melanie said, we want it to be better. But there's a difference between doing what I think the State Board of Education does and our local school boards and trying to constructively say, what can we do to try to continue to improve? Because we can all always get better at anything. So I never want to feel defensive when we have this discussion, but there's a difference between that and just saying we should tear the whole thing down. And I think that is the big difference.
One quick question. Is it on? Is it on? This is for Ethan. Ethan, on the budget and you're talking about the revenues that were coming in. When the lack of sales of soybeans, corn from the state of Kansas, when will we see that take its effect on revenues coming in to the state?
That's a great question. All that is supposed to be factored in. So when they do these revenue estimates, they look at what is current law or law that has been passed, and that even if it has a later effective date, like if you pass a law and you say this is effective starting in 2028, when they do those estimates, they assume current law will stay current law, and they assume that laws that have been passed that will go into effect at a future date will go into effect on that date. So all of that is to say that is, to the best of their ability, factored into the projections that I gave. But certainly that is, I think, a very fluid area with the tariffs, and they seem to be coming and going and up and down. So I think there's a lot of volatility there. And as I always caveat, I think the projections are important and we should all know them. And that's why I devoted so much time talking about it, because sometimes we'll have these discussions about, well, we should cut this tax or we should do extra funding for XYZ. And there's like, well, okay, that could be good, but have we looked at how that impacts the budget? So I always try to have every discussion kind of grounded in the budget. But those are supposed to be factored in. But again, projections are only projections as well done as I think they are.
How old is Hutchinson Prison? When was it built?
We might have to do phone a friend to Mr. Google, but it is. I think I'm safe in saying well over 100 years old. Well, I believe well over that. Representative Ousley is going to figure it out for us, but we'll come back to that. But it is very old. 1885.
Soybeans, it's beef. And I have a good friend in Salina, keeps very close track of what's going on in the agricultural community out in western Kansas. And, we have $40 billion going to Argentina. We have really a great history of harboring certain types of people down there. But he's told me that the beef producers in western Kansas are just infuriated over that. And that if it keeps going, it will bring down beef prices. But if they start shipping in tons of Argentinian beef, which is the plan, it's going to hurt all of our ranchers and beef producers in the state of Kansas as well. So there's that.
We have time for one more question.
So, Jarrod, when you were talking about the social workers, I'm sorry. When you were talking about the social workers, are they suffering from the same efforts to decrease the qualifications in order to cut vacancies? I mean, and so is it a factor of training or shortage of staff that they're having more attacks?
So I wish Commissioner Fast was here to comment on that question, because she is the president or the chair of the association worker. And they have the department within their rules and regulations have expanded who can qualify as a social worker to where it's any related degree. It doesn't any longer have to be a social worker's degree, but it can be related field, and there's a list of those. I wasn't thrilled when that happened, and Kansas actually has a long history of respecting social workers and allowing that to be a career here, and slowly over time it's diminished, and the retention today, there's in my opinion, there's a lot of problems. We talked about privatizing schools. Well, we privatized our child welfare system in 1997, and we now farm out, our case management providers. We farm out our foster care, adoption services, and I can have a lengthy discussion with you if you'd like. But yes, the qualifiers have been reduced in an effort to retain and recruit, because somebody's got to provide the case management.
All right, Beth, I'll do one last question and then we'll wrap up. Wait for the mic just so folks can hear it.
I'm usually pretty loud. In response to the question, Kansas has title protection for social workers. So that means that to be a social worker, you have to have graduated with a degree in social work. So I'm a social worker. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I would just be crazy. Stephanie talks about going crazy. I would go crazy if they tried to change that. Yeah. Oh, wait. So the other thing is with social work, there is a compact that is like nursing compact that is going through now. Kansas passed it. Other states have passed it. It's going to be so that social workers can practice state to state. And that's going to be good for especially military spouses that are social workers to be able to practice. They may have gotten their degree in Kansas. They may have gotten their license in Kansas. They can get a compact license and practice in another compact state. So that's something else for social workers.
All right, well, thank you for doing that important work. Let's wrap up there. Just a reminder, please sign in if you haven't already. And remember that for December, just like November, we're doing the third Saturday instead of the fourth Saturday. And we should be back in our regular room in December, but please sign in so we can make sure to get you those notices. But we'll see you in the third Saturday in December, and have a great rest of the month and a great weekend. Thank you.